It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk about Conor Benn signing with Zuffa Boxing. We are also going to talk about Ronda Rousey's comments to Jim Rome and her comments in a film segment with Nikisa Badarian. We're going to take a quick look at some comments that Dana White made after the UFC Houston Fight Night at the post-fight presser. But the big thing we're going to talk about is the White House card and its associated costs, well, reported costs, and the wild new updates in the UFC antitrust cases. But before we get into all that, I would recommend that you pick up a paid subscription so that you have access to all of our content, because about half of it will be behind a paywall. Now, John, how the heck are you? How was Taco Tuesday?
I don't know. My mom had a good time. I left her there with my aunt to eat tacos at the VFW, and I had something else for dinner. So it was a nice little break. Let's just put it that way.
All right. So are you ready to get into it? Because you know what the first question is going to be. Tell us about the new updates to the UFC antitrust cases, because boy, it's a doozy.
Well, let me look for some good readers here that I need my readers, my peeps here for
his cheater glasses. For those that don't know, we old people use cheaters.
Yes. So that way I can actually look. But anyways, there was a filing, there was an update to the UFC antitrust case, as we call it. And that update was that there was a filing from Dominance MMA, the third party. They filed what's a legal opposition on February 23rd, 2026. If you're listening, that was, I believe that is Monday night. And that was filed by Christensen Trial Lawyers on behalf of Dominance MMA. And Dominance, of course, is a non-party. In other words, they're not a named litigant, not a plaintiff or defendant in the current Johnson v. Zuffa antitrust litigation. And when we say Johnson v. Zuffa, we're also talking about the other two related antitrust cases as well. And so they're requesting that the court deny a motion to hold them in civil contempt that was filed by the plaintiffs. The core of the dispute involves Dominance's alleged failure to comply with a previous court order regarding the production of discovery documents, and that includes sensitive fighter contracts, communications, things like that. I believe that was months ago. Actually, they came to this agreement with the judge and the plaintiffs to do this. And so the key arguments they make against why they're not in contempt is they say civil contempt is unwarranted because one is they've had substantial compliance. They claim to have spent months in good faith efforts to comply, and they have met with and conferred with the plaintiffs. They provided an inventory of sources. They've hired an ESI vendor, a Holo Discovery, the same one that was suggested for the in TKO, UFC, and the plaintiffs to hold to manage their discovery as well, third party for those phones. That Holo Discovery then is supposed to begin data collection. They also argue that there's an ambiguity to the prior orders. They contend the court previous orders was not a rigid production order with a hard deadline, but rather a structured multi-step process that requires ongoing cooperation and further court guidance if disputes arose. They also talk about third-party confidentiality. They highlight vehement is what they use, objections from fighters, Dominance clients, who fear that disclosing their private financials and contractual information could lead to regulatory or professional interests in their home country. They also argue about a lack of control over devices, that Dominance stated that they cannot produce data from two specific custodians who were independent contractors, not employees, and who took their personal devices with them after terminating their relationship with the company. The other thing Dominance cites, concerns regarding the plaintiff's conduct. The filing notes several incidents that have heightened Dominance's concerns regarding how their data will be handled. One thing they talk about is the fear of publicity and defamation. One of the plaintiffs in the Johnson v. Zuffa case was apparently recorded, and that was publicly circulated. I don't know if it really was publicly circulated because it was on a thread, an MMA FA Q&A thread, apparently. But they claim it was publicly circulated, a video that was recorded outside the courthouse after the judge had ordered discovery. And this led to online harassment, and they claimed defamatory comments against their founder, Ali Abdelaziz. And then they also talk about a privacy breach that the plaintiffs filed Dominance's preliminary inventory list on the public docket without redacting the personal email addresses and phone numbers of the non-party individuals. And so what Dominance is going to ask for here, they have a request in relief. They want to deny the contempt motion and deny also the plaintiff's request for attorney fees. They want to establish clear safeguards such as attorney's eyes only designations and filing material under seal. And they want to provide a feasible timeline. And that's their argument for why they should not be held in contempt.
I need you to explain the video. Okay. And what they're, my goodness, this sounds like so much Mickey Mouse bullshit. I was taken aback when I looked at your thread. I need you to explain the video, especially since Rob Mazie of the MMA FA and one of the attorneys came out and said that the thread itself was privileged information. So could you expand on that, please? Well,
let's cover two things. One is this is my analysis as a non-lawyer, but someone that's been following this case and stuff. It does seem weird to me that they're claiming about the third party confidentiality, that there's the objections from fighters about disclosing their private stuff, because none of the material gets released to the public, right? People, everybody says, oh, in discovery, this is all going to be made public. If you think back to the Lee case, not everything was made public. Did we get many text messages do we get any text messages that we know of about Dominance and Dana White between various communications? There was a small number of contracts released, but not large numbers of material contracts or communications. The stuff that gets released is only if it reaches like class certification and the judge approves it, and even then it can be ordered to be sealed, so it couldn't be approved, right? So the fear that their material might be leaked seems somewhat unfounded to me, that fighters should be concerned about that, because the material will be not even potentially released until it gets a point where the court would make it public. And even then, that material could be sealed, or select information that the fighters are worried about could be sealed. There's many ways around that. So I don't quite buy that, the objections of the fighters about disclosing it, because it's a sealed court case, right? This material is not going to be made immediately public. It might never be made public. The second one, we get now to the more interesting thing, at least you find the more interesting, and I do too, I got to be honest, is this chat thread and video. So what happened is Judge Boulware had issued an order regarding what the defendant, in this case the third party, Dominance, has to do regarding revealing discovery. So they basically, the judge came somewhat hard a couple months back on Dominance about the discovery. And it looks like what happened is someone, I don't know if it's someone from the Rob Macy or someone else, or one of the fighters on his own. I think it was Misha Serkinov, but I can't tell from the image I got which fighter it was. Recorded himself outside the courtroom talking about the proceedings, what just happened, and then posting it to I think it's a WhatsApp thread, right? That's full of fighters that are a part of these lawsuits. That's a place where they communicate. It's supposed to be exclusively for fighters, and that's where they communicate with them and give them information about these lawsuits. And after it was posted, a large string of fighters, if you look at it, I posted it on Twitter, some of it, we'll put up this dominance filing in our Substack. So you can look at it there. You'll see just a list of fighters just going off on Ali Abdelaziz then after that video was posted. And his complaint is, this is, defamation and criticism of him and hurts him with his clients. And I find it hard to believe this because one is this wasn't like secret information was leaked. This was a court where the public is allowed to go. I've been in the court with Judge Boulware. The public is allowed to go, allowed to report on what happens there. And he shared it with fighters, not in public, but on a private WhatsApp chat. So the public wouldn't even be aware of this if this lawsuit hadn't posted that WhatsApp thread, right? And so that's one, like, okay, that is, how do you have defamation on something if it's not really made public? It's a private conversation. On top of that, I would have to see what he said that is false in that video, right? So right there, that strikes down. Now, the other problem is, as Rob Macy brought up, this disclosure could possibly be a violation by Dominance by posting it in, at least making it public without some sort of redaction, because one is it was a internal WhatsApp communication with fighters, and Rob Macy, who's I think put this together as part of the MMA Q&A, is one of the attorneys in the suit. So this is potentially protected conversation, protected because it's a client attorney privilege. He is an attorney in the case speaking to his clients, and you'd say, oh, these fighters, not all the fighters have hired him. No, that they are members of the class. The class they represent, or potential class members. That means it's his clients. So this communication should potentially be protected and privileged, and should not have been shared. First with Dominance, it should not have been made public. It should not be part of the suit if that's true. And so there's that question as well. And then there's the final question is who leaked this to Dominance, because that whole thread apparently is supposed to be just fighters there to communicate about the case. So all that together, I find is another element. We will see if there will be some sort of filing or complaint about that going forward.
So what would be the next step?
Well, we're going to have to wait. The big next step is March 3rd. There's a status conference hearing. And at that March 3rd status conference, we will see what Judge Boulware's reaction to all this stuff is. Is he going to agree with Dominance that, yes, they have more time, they've been complying? Or will he come down hard on them saying you're not complying with the order? And so we will find out March 3rd. Set your clock, people. Mark it on your calendar. Circle the date.
All right. Now we're going to move on to the White House card, because Puck, the outlet Puck, is reporting that the White House card could cost upwards of $60 million. That cost would be to the UFC. Do you think that total could be accurate?
Well, I mean, it's possible, I guess. You got to kind of think about it, break it down. One is, remember the most expensive show ever apparently was the Sphere. That it was budgeted, I believe, 8 to 10 million was the original budget, and then they ended up more than doubling it. And they claim at the end it was over 20 million in production costs. That's not counting fighter costs. That was the production costs supposedly for those videos that were. I got to be honest, I was not. I mean, they look good, they look cool on TV and stuff, but they didn't really blow. They didn't seem like $20 million worth, at least to me. So there's that. So they spent supposedly $20 million on that. And I see some people saying, oh, this is triple what the Sphere costs. Well, the question is, are they including fighter pay in this? Because it says that the $60 million cost here is for what TKO will pay for the event. And that language suggests to me that they will pay for the event is not production costs. That's all the costs. That's everything TKO will pay. And so that could be possible, because if you have expensive production costs, now there's questions. I'm sure everybody's curious. Is that 60 million only going to be paid by TKO, or will taxpayers pay for something? let's just imagine that 60 million is only for TKO because we don't have enough information to say for sure. And they're claiming that's what we're going to pay. And they might be saving millions upon millions of dollars. Maybe it'd be a much more expensive if they were having to pay for everything, and what's being paid for by taxpayers, namely security, things like that, is not being included. So we'll imagine that 60 million it's going to be somewhere in 60 million. Well, if you look at fighter purses, right, they're the people that I've heard being mentioned as possible candidates for being on this card. I think the number one is for the headline is Ilia Topuria and Justin Gaethje. Isn't that correct? Is the headliner they throw out the most?
Yes.
Well, you look at what they could be paid. You're talking what, 5 to 10 million or more, slightly more. That's a sizable amount right there. So let's say it's the upper end. And it's like 10 million for those two as a main event. Okay, we have 10 million in costs there. A lot of the other fighters I've seen are like, Covington and all these other guys are in the mid range, maybe not 7 figures, but 6 figures, mid and higher. So that's several $1 million. Each bout might cost 1 million on the undercard. That's several million more. And then the other name gets thrown out. This is the one that suggests to me that this might be mostly purses, is Conor McGregor. Because if Conor McGregor, and we can, as we know, Conor McGregor, at least based on estimates, makes about around 20 million a fight since his new deal. If he's added to it, if they have to negotiate a new deal, maybe he gets a bump up. Instead of 20 million, it's 25 million, or maybe him and his opponent together get 25 million. But you throw that in, suddenly, if suddenly the production cost might be the same as the Sphere, but the purse amount, the total payout, might actually reach about 40 million, possibly. If we add a Topuria Gaethje fight, we have a Conor McGregor fight, and then a card with, veterans that are making sizable purses, you realistically, conceivably, could hit a $40 million, maybe even a little bit more total in payouts. So if that's true, and I guess we'll learn if that's what they're budgeting, if it's this cost is partly based on the fact that Conor McGregor might be on the card. We'll have to wait and see. But if that's the case, I could see that, because I am a little bit hard to believe that the event as described, unless they're just going to go in such an insane direction on the construction, the event is described. I find it kind of hard to believe that the production cost would be 60 million or even close to 60 million. So I do tend to believe that perhaps that budget that they're saying that costs 60 million is based on fighter costs, and perhaps they're including some of the more expensive fighters they're hoping to have on the show.
Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of things and I can't guarantee that these are true. Well, at least part of it. Part of it I heard directly from Dana's mouth in an interview. Now, Dana says that part of the production will be like a little bit of logistics with the weather. He says that every 15 minutes that they are going to have the cameras and stuff like that, production crews positioned to monitor how the sun is setting, so that behind the fighters you will either see the White House or you will see the Washington Monument. That every 15 minutes they will be monitoring the sun's position and having camera crews set up all around, blah blah blah. So I'm going to tell you that, and then I'm going to tell you what the rumor part, the report part, and that is, reports are saying that there may only be 6 or 7 fights total for this card.
Yeah, that's what I was going off of, because I was imagining at the peak. Let's say we have Topuria Gaethje, we have Conor McGregor versus someone, and then 5 cards that the purse for each bout. Because again, if you have Covington, and I can't remember who the opponents they're talking about, but Covington at this point in his career, he's 6 figures. Some of them are mid or even high 6. That comes close to about $1 million per fight. So that's 5 million more. So that makes sense. That would probably, I could imagine possibly, if they have a set aesthetic they're going for that's really hard to get with the lighting of the White House and that, I can imagine that being expensive. But overall too, it's like, even if it's 60 million, and even if the UFC's profit margins are going to be low for this event, because I still think, you look at it, I think technically this could be a one-time money loser for the UFC And why I say that is because my understanding is they're not going to have sponsorship because it would look tacky at the White House, right? So they're going to lose out. They're going to forego a large portion of their sponsorship. And there's no ticket sales. So there's no gate. And so those two things take away. So they all they can depend on is their broadcast fee. Now, with the bump up of the new TKO for pay-per-view, I imagine it's going to be 30 to 35 million on the most number of events. But it is also possible that part of the deal is that Paramount is going to kick in extra for this one event. But so they might break even or make some money. But the whole point of this event really is, as big as it is, and as much as it might not be a massive moneymaker directly, is it's going to drive numbers of subscribers to Paramount, right? And it's going to get their brand out there immensely. It's a massive marketing campaign for the UFC and a massive way to ingratiate themselves with the administration, a massive way to make connections to all these other people. And so there's, direct revenue directly in the event. We don't know the full logistics yet, so it's hard. I shouldn't say too much about that. But direct revenue, might not be as much as you'd imagine for such a big event. But that second order revenue by all the connections, all the other things that come out of it, I am sure will make this an incredibly lucrative event in the long run for them, barring some weird disaster. Because anybody following the news, there's tons of weird shit going on in the United States. So anything could derail anything at any moment.
All right, let's get to Conor Benn, because that's also been pretty big news over the past week. And there's been a lot of talk about him signing with Zuffa Boxing for one fight at $15 million. So what do you think of that signing and the amount?
Well, people are quick to note. I think they're quick to note that that either Turki Al-Sheikh or the Saudis are the ones paying that fee, that $15 million, and it's almost as a way like, oh, Zuffa Boxing, TKO would never pay that. I don't think it matters because it does matter. It's true that TKO has this great situation where really they don't have to foot the bill for anything. They don't have to go lose any money on any venture, any cost, because Saudis are paying for everything. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter who's paying, because it's an example of how competitive the market is in boxing. The reason they're giving him I don't think they're giving him $15 million for charity, right? The reason they're giving him $15 million is they want to entice him to sign up with them instead of being with Eddie Hearn. And it's, it's something that happens every few years. People are like, oh, Dana White has said this. I think back, he had 2011, 12. Remember that interview? He said boxers make too much money.
Oh, yes.
And then people complain, that every time when Showtime entered the space to compete, especially when they came after the Super 6 one after Mayweather, people are like, oh, Showtime's spending too much, driving up the costs. The sport, the purse is too high. Then PBC was driving up the purses too high when they launched with Waddell and Reed. Then DAZN came in and with Batum, and they were driving up the purses too much again, right? And then the Saudis came in, they're driving up the purses. So it's in a perpetual situation where the purses are apparently always being driven up and they're getting paid too much, but nothing ever brings it down. And the reason why is there's massive competition. So it does not matter if you're going to say that Turkey or the Saudis are paying him and not TKO. Someone's paying him, because that's the only reason he's signing with them. The other thing I take away from this deal is Conor Benn is somewhat of a star, but I don't think he's, I find it hard to believe he's worth $15 million. But to me, it strikes me as just a stereotypical loss leader. They're paying him a lot of money because they want to attract attention for him. To me, it gives away that the rumors where the stories reports that they were negotiating with Sky Sports is done and real. And there will be a Sky Sports announcement because they want a big name on a British, some British event to let people know Zuffa Boxing is here and going to be on Sky Sports. So, that's what comes to my mind. It's a very lucrative deal. I think a lot of people are making a big deal out of it, but the amount of money is not earth shattering in the business sports. I think what's caught everybody's attention, the reason this has been a bigger story is that it's Zuffa Boxing is that he signed with. Never mind that Zuffa Boxing might not be paying the full tab, but because he signed with Zuffa Boxing, I think this price tag is getting much more attention than it would have happened if someone else had signed. He had signed with, because if you remember when Crawford had signed with what was the name of that promotion that did that one-off, Black Prime or whatever.
Yeah.
And he got about 10 million supposedly guaranteed. That was a story, but didn't get the legs of this, and that was, kind of close to the same level of purses. Didn't make the splash. It's the Zuffa boxing connection, the fact that the Zuffa entity is letting that much amount of money being spent on Conor Benn. That's what everybody's reacting to.
What do you think about the Andy Ruiz signing?
That's, good for them. They signed Andy Ruiz, but Andy Ruiz, I think, missed his window of opportunity by about 5 years. And that's a lot of the guys in Zuffa, but in boxing in general. There was a lot of missed opportunities, but a lot of it was COVID too. That did put a dent into some big fights for a while as well. But I think it's good for him, but he should have been fighting a while ago. My understanding, he was holding out for a large amount of money after he lost to Joshua, and it just does not. It was unrealistic. At least that's what people said.
It seems like a lot of fighters are taking note about this big $15 million purse for a one-off fight. Do you think that means that Hearn is right, that the boxing purses might actually cause problems with UFC fighters?
I hate to admit it, he might be, because I was laughing at it, because there has been, it's only been a few fighters, but there's been a noteworthy reaction, right? We have MVP brought it up. Sean O'Malley brought it up in fact, Sean O'Malley went through the entire arc of the boxing news story, paved story for MMA fighters. First, he was disbelief. He couldn't believe someone would get paid that much. And the reporting from Raphael and Chris Mannix makes me believe that number is accurate. First was complete disbelief. And then there was some outrage. The fact that, look what I do. I can't get anything close to that. UFC fighters don't make anything close to that. And then there was some acceptance. Well, that's business. And then there was justification. Well, the UFC is just in business, and that's just the way it is. And that seems to be that's the arc of, if you notice every story, every time people get offended by some pay issue in MMA, that's the arc of the fighters. But I have noticed a large number of fighters reacting, and it does also remind me, remember when the Reebok deal came out, went into play, just as the Reebok deal was going into play, UFC had sold for $4 billion. And there was a period of a few months there, you could tangibly feel some of the anger and frustration from fighters. And there were fighters just outraged that this was happening. In fact, at that moment, I could call up a lot of fighters, and they would tell me, what their purses are. They wanted it all out for a brief window of time, and then it disappeared. And so this somewhat reminds me of that there's this moment of realization and outrage. And I tend to believe, just like in the past, it's going to end up being that it's going to fade away. And, fighters also will wonder, I think that it's just the fact that people don't understand why the industries work the way they are. Because the lesson, again, here, as I just mentioned a moment ago, is that in boxing is just much more competition, right? That's the lesson. The lesson a lot of people take from this is, fighters got to learn to negotiate better. Well, you can't really negotiate better when you have only one party to negotiate with. Or they'll say, fighters got to organize a union. That's unrealistic as hell. Or fighters just got to stand up stronger or get better management. None of that's realistic. The reason boxing, can do this, why this continually happens in boxing, even if the Saudis are involved or not, that continually these people can make large purses, is because there's just a much more competitive market in boxing. In many ways, it's like when you look at, we always want to compare it to the NFL and NBA, the stick and ball sports. And they're like, they're 50-50, but those sports weren't always 50-50. When they were a lot of monopolistic control by the owners, the percentage was lower than that for the players. But there were periods where there were intense competition, and not leagues inside the league between teams, but between two different leagues. Like when the NFL was against the AFL, NBA, ABA, the WHA, and the NHL. even the NFL, after the White v. NFL ruling in the 90s, so much competition that, wage shares were in the like 70% range. And boxing is almost permanently, because there's not a collective bargaining agreement that sets a flat amount, because there's not a single entity monopoly like we have the UFC. There's just this massive amount of constant competition, right? And that's like at those leagues when they're at their most competitive. And that's why fighters can make so much. So the question, I think, for fighters that are concerned about this aspect, I guess, is the question for them are, what are fighters going to do about the situation? And if history's a lesson, they're not going to be able to, they're not going to do much on their own. And I don't know if there's much they can do. There's a handful of things they can do. As we've seen, there's a handful of fighters that have done something and probably got ridiculed mercilessly for it. I'm sure we brought in Kung Lee and Nate Corey and John Fitch and Brandon Vera and Kyle Kingsbury and Vasquez and all them. They would tell you that they got ridiculed a lot for filing a suit. The same with Tristan Connolly and Cajun Johnson and CB Dalloway and Misha Serkinov and Phil Davis now, that they get, that ridiculed. Not many people stand with them. But, that's what doing something is, right? That is, you have to do something to increase the competition in the sport, either through antitrust, which is, again, I highly recommend, again, if you ever have not heard it, go back and listen to my discussion with James Quinn, the guy that negotiated the collective bargaining agreements for all the major leagues during the heyday of when this stuff was put in place. And he'll tell you that the thing that drives athlete pay up is not collective bargaining, it's competition. Collective bargaining is just what you give to the owners. So you have a permanent split so they can stay as all the teams can stay in competitively, but you want competition's what drives up the wages. And the only way to go about that is either through antitrust. That's the most common. That's the way he uses, not striking. Striking does not, as he said, the labor strikes don't really work. It's antitrust. That's one. Or do it. The other thing that no one wants done is legislation. And, don't let this current bill pass and allow the Ali Act, the way it is written now, to be expanded to cover MMA. Then you might see much more competition. But, as much as fans will say they want to see the fighters make more, at the same time, they don't want to see those two things happen either to the industry.
Ronda Rousey, she was interviewed by Jim Rome, and she spoke about why she and Gina Carano did not end up with their fight being promoted by the UFC. What did you think of the reason she gave? Because all of this kind of interlocks, especially with our next question about promoting.
Yeah, it does. It's, her big point was that what's interesting is we can actually see that her story is true. And I think Dana White confirmed it, that she was 9 months pregnant. She called Dana White. And if people remember, back in December of 2024, Dana White, remember, he said, we have a fight no one saw coming next year. Remember that?
Yep.
We got this big fight no one saw coming. And people are like, what does he talk about? He's just making shit up. It seems pretty obvious that it was in early January he made that announcement. It seems pretty obvious that he was talking about Ronda Rousey, Gina Carano. Why? Ronda said she called when she was 9 months pregnant. Guess what? She gave birth a few weeks after Dana White's comments. And so everything lines up. And that it obviously was last year, and Gina Carano could not get in shape quick enough. And so when they got signed by Paramount, according to her, they were willing to do the fight before when there were pay-per-view points for Ronda. But as soon as they went to Paramount and they got rid of pay-per-view completely, they didn't want to do it because they did not want to set a guaranteed floor that high, because that would give leverage or, create the what we're seeing in boxing right now. See, with the Zuffa boxing signing, that fighters would start saying, why am I not getting that amount of money? And we can also estimate what she would have got. She said with the pay-per-view bonus, if she would have matched her career high, I think it was 1 million buys, she would have got more than her entire career in the UFC. And we know what she got, her entire MMA career. We know what she made. She made about 18 million. So she was expecting more than 18 million. She wanted that as a guaranteed rate to fight. They would not do it. It sounds like, MVP did it, agreed to that. So I guess it's kind of safe to guess that she's going to be getting over 18 million, which would put her, if she's second, probably behind Conor McGregor, is the highest MMA purse ever. I guess if she goes much higher than that, she could eclipse him. But that's the issue, and that it makes sense to me. That sounds plausible in many ways. I mean, what people miss is that I shouldn't say people miss. They understand. It's interesting. I should say what she says is that she wants to blame the current crop, right, of executives over at TKO for this. It's not Dana White. She said it wasn't Dana White. So I find that interesting. She wants to blame them. But when it's Dana White and the Fertittas, the previous guy, that put this structure in place so they wouldn't have to pay more. And so she wants to blame the current eggheads, new guys that didn't want to agree to pay her the money. Nice old Dana would have, but you forget that Dana and the Fertittas are the one that made under 20% of the revenue, the set model that they had. And so that's the other part I find somewhat amusing about this. But, the key point, I guess, is because they went to Paramount, because they don't have pay-per-views anymore, I do find it plausible that they didn't want to raise the minimum. It's also true, I think, as people miss, Dana White, as he said, he does not run things like he used to. He was in that hearing in Vegas. He said he doesn't do matchmaking. It might be a little bit of a lie. He doesn't do the contracts. But I don't think actually anybody at the UFC really runs the UFC. If you want some behind the curtain stuff, Hunter Campbell runs operations for the UFC, but the people that make the decisions about the broadcast rights, where they're going to go, things like that, and probably would have to greenlight a massive increase to the floor, are not anybody that works in the UFC only, which is the matchmakers, Hunter Campbell or Dana White. I think the people that approve that are Endeavor, who are getting or now William Morris, who are getting a management fee for the company and are making all the key decisions. So that part is true, but at the same time, who's the people that originally set this structure in place that says under 20% of the revenue is going to go to the fighters? I think she's giving a little bit of a escape to a cop out by saying that Dana White and them would have had nothing to do with this.
Yeah, I did notice that she said after it was bought, after the company was bought, everything changed. I did notice that. Now, I'm going to go off script for a second and ask a question that just occurred to me. Do you think that the plaintiff attorneys in the antitrust case could point to the things Ronda said and the things Dana said in response about the matchmaking and the deals that did not work out, that fell through, and how she says she specifically went to Dana and Dana said, yes, she did, and we couldn't make it happen? Do you think that the plaintiffs could point to that and say Dana is matchmaking?
Both sides are going to point to this discussion, because TKO is going to point to and say, look, there's competition. MVP is putting this big fight on. We have a massive competition. The plaintiffs are going to look at it and say, no, look how late in their career they're doing this. Look how they had to go to TKO first, and only after TKO shot it down could they bring it to somewhere else. This is not true competition. And will be interesting if Discovery, if any of this is part of Discovery, because what you'd want to know was if Ronda was still under contract, right? My understanding is she did have a contract from 2016. When did they give her release? Why did they give her release? Because they'll want to point out and say, it's unrealistic. Perhaps if UFC on their own recall said, we're going to release you, but we could have kept her longer. Well, the plaintiffs are going to point that out and say, this demonstrates the power leverage they have, because she had been under contract for a long time, and technically they still had her under contract. So both sides are going to try to make arguments on this, and depending on what information's available, I don't think the numbers from the fight, because I think Discovery ended last year, what material they're going to use, that might not enter into it. But the idea that someone could leave and go do a big fight somewhere else, they're both going to make a case for that. And one side's going to say this just shows there's massive competition. The other side's going to point out that the only reason Ronda that this event is not happening with the UFC because the UFC waived on it, and they had the power to block it or hold it themselves if they wanted to. And the other aspect about that is the whole Dana White does nothing thing, because it sounds like, according to what Ronda Rousey said, at least some of the negotiations were through Dana White. And so I'm sure they have. Well, the problem is they don't have Dana White. I don't know when they have his cell phone material, but I think that a lot of that might be missing material. But that would be evidence they'd want to point out that Dana White is actually involved in negotiations, because Ronda White was talking to him. Although, the claim they make, White and Hunter Campbell, is that, I might talk to her a little bit, but then I'll direct them to Hunter Campbell to do the actual negotiations. So, again, both sides are going to make this case. The key is, what do we have available on Discovery? And right now, we don't have much. So maybe Ronda will be kind enough to hand over her phone or these messages to the court.
Now, she was in a film segment with Nikisa Badarian. I think it was for Netflix, in the promotion of this fight. And she was discussing how she'd be, quote, going hard in the trenches in the promotion of this fight up against UFC, because now it's an MVP versus UFC kind of thing. What did you make of her odd statement about the UFC suffering from a lack of competition?
Well, the other comment she made, like, they can't just count on every few years paying out an antitrust settlement, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think she's making an honest argument that the UFC has no competition, and that's why fighters, don't make the big bucks, and so I don't buy it that this is suddenly going to present competition to the UFC. This is just this is a one-time spectacle, kind of freak show fight between two known commodities well past their prime. And is that true competition to the UFC? I don't really see, but it is interesting because it goes hand in hand with what other fighters have been saying recently. There just seems to be more and more fighters bringing up, acknowledging it. And here's Ronda Rousey, someone that was a tremendous company person, and she even raised that in the I think the Jim Rome interview, that I'm such a great company person, now pay me. So you can't help to detect maybe some slight frustration there, some feeling that maybe she was underpaid, or realization that there's a bigger purse available. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that's my sense. Also, I think it kind of shows you the limits of promoting this event, that they're trying to present it as a sign that MVP is competing with the UFC, when again, that seems to be pretty far from the truth. But it's worth. I'm going to be intrigued if she brings this up more. If she talks more on this, because if so, it could indicate there is some level of frustration. Maybe the fact that she got a big settlement from the lawsuit opened her eyes. I'm not sure. But I did find it interesting. She brought up specifically the antitrust lawsuit. Although again, it could be like a lot of fighters tend to do, especially if they leave the UFC. They kind of wrap themselves in, they're the person doing the work to help all fighters. And maybe this is a case of that, where she's trying to present herself as, another one of those people that are fighting for the other fighters.
After Saturday's UFC Houston fight night, Dana took a bunch of questions in the post-fight presser about several other topics. The first one being about Sean Strickland's very bigoted comments in the lead-up to his fight with Anthony Hernandez. He replied that it was basically the media's fault for riling Sean up. What was your take on that?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but no one asked Strickland about Bad Bunny, did they, or the Super Bowl?
I
don't believe so.
To be honest, I didn't hear anything about that.
Yeah, he went off and called Bad Bunny the F word, in non-American. He just went, but my understanding is no one he went off on his own. So how do you blame the media for something that Strickland did on his own? It's also strange for Dana White. He had this last couple of years. He had a message about you can't ask for anything from anybody else. You have to take personal responsibility. that's a little weird to say that and then blame the media for the stupid shit Sean says. Where's the personal responsibility of Sean? Apparently all the fighters are so dumb that they can't be blamed for anything they do themselves. It's always the media's fault. So that was weird. I also would be intrigued. I kind of wish Sean had gone off on that same. He did an interview right before the fight where he talked about fighter pay and the UFC's predatory tactics. That's the comments I want to see Sean do at a UFC presser and see the reaction to that. That would be intriguing. Although, I also will note that the UFC did turn off his mic. And I don't have a problem with that because, a lot of other people are like, I guess the only problem you'd have is that the UFC claims that you're allowed to say anything. Obviously, that's not true. You turned off the mic. But maybe someone listened to our show because if you remember what we talked about, what did we say? The what you should do is just not give him the fucking mic.
Yeah, they turned off his mic though when he was talking about Jim West or John West, the Aspen Ladd's coach, grooming her. And a lot of people thought, well, they're protecting a pedophile or whatever. But somebody else made a pretty good assumption, in my opinion, in that they were basically protecting themselves from a lawsuit.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's libel. I mean, there's the number of people that feed me tips for stories, right? And I'm like, okay, that's great, but I need to speak to that person. The person that you're saying said that has to tell me that directly. I can't report hearsay because I could be liable for defamation or slander. So I need that directly, and that's one of the problems. There's always people like, you won't report on the story. I can't because I have no protection. No, I can't report hearsay. The only hearsay I can report if it's from a government filing. If it's a document, that's why we constantly can bring up the court case stuff, because those are government filings. I'm protected when I report what's said, even if it ends up not being true. I am protected when I report what is filed with the court. I am not protected when I report someone whispered in my ear and told me this story happened. That's why I have to get multiple sources on that. And it has to be a story that is not defamation. It's just it's color. It's a possibility. Me reporting on the potential, like say a potential fight that does. Someone said these two people are going to fight. They're going to make this amount of money. I can report on some of those rumors, but that's not defamation. There's no lawsuit against me on that because there's no harm done. You could never prove harm on that. But if you tell me that someone raped someone, and then you're like, why didn't you ever report the story? Because I never got the news from anybody but you, and I can't, that's just an example. I didn't get that actual story, but that's an example. So that's right. On here, I could believe that. But the other thing I heard too, I was listening, I thought he was talking about Chimaev when they cut his mic.
No, they cut it when he was talking about Aspen Ladd being groomed.
Oh, okay, then that makes sense because you do not want to, without, you just can't say that shit without some evidence.
Right. Okay, so Dana also was asked about the Conor Benn signing, and this was in regards to his beating up babies comment where he referenced Eddie Hearn and said that he felt like he was beating up babies with all these other boxing promotions. And what he responded was, I swear to God, I think Dana really likes to poke the bear, but he said that, is there a bigger pussy than Eddie Hearn? So I want to ask you if you think maybe he might be being just a little bit too bold right now, considering that the proposed Revival Act bill hasn't even passed yet?
Well, but possibly. Now I see that there's a story with Frank Warren. It just came out right now, so we're not going to get into it because I don't want to misdo the story. But it does look like maybe he's, jumping the gun here. He is feeling confident, I'm sure, right? He's feeling very confident because the other promoters are in a terrible place. They put themselves in that place by, becoming beholden to the guy that said he's going to run them all out of business.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!